This is one of those shields up moments where we're going to jump into a hands-on lab and protect our NSX edge devices by configuring NSX high availability at the edge device level. So we've logged on to the VMware hands-on lab, specifically HOL 1903, the Getting Started lab, fired up the vSphere web client, logged on as the administrator at vSphere.local. And of course, we've hopped down to networking and security, where we start off on the dashboard. Now, we want to look at setting up high availability for our NSX edge devices. And that can happen during the initial configuration or after the fact when an edge has already been built. So let's hop over to NSX edges on the left-hand side. And first, let's just examine this perimeter gateway that's already running in this lab environment and see if we can add HA to it. Let's double-click the NSX edge to jump right into its core properties. And then we want to change those properties, so we'll head over to the Manage tab. On the left-hand side, we want to make sure that we're looking at Settings and the Configuration tab. In the upper left-hand corner, we see the details of this particular edge. We see its size, syslog server, SSH support, and if we scroll to the bottom, we can see that there is one edge virtual machine that is supporting the configuration that we see. But in the box between those two things, we can see our support for high availability HA configuration. We can see its current state is disabled. So let's click that Change button in the upper right-hand corner of that little block. And here we see NSX's high availability configuration. Let's switch from disable to enable, and then we get to choose a VNIC. Now the default here is actually any internal. It'll allow it to find any available internal interface and send those sweet little heartbeat packets over that network. And that should really tell you something. If VMware is willing to say, you know what, default configuration, just find something, anything to throw that heartbeat network over, then that's really indicative that this heartbeat traffic is not that big of a deal, and we don't need to worry about creating some sort of logical switch that's dedicated just to the purpose of supporting a heartbeat network. So in this case, I'm going to choose the transit network, which is just used between the distributed logical routers and the edge gateway, and allow that to be what is used to support this VNIC. The default declared dead time is 15 seconds. Remember, HA is not a fault-tolerant solution, but it's designed to minimize the amount of failover downtime that we're going to experience. Then we have the management IP addresses. Those virtual NICs that are plugged into the logical switch can have IP addresses associated with them. But you'll notice there's no little red asterisk on this. It's not required. It is an optional feature because if we don't discretely assign IP addresses to those VNICs, it will use what we're familiar with as the APIPA range that begins with 169.254. Are you getting a sense for how flexible this is? You could choose a VNIC, but you don't have to. You could assign management IPs, but you don't have to. And then if we want, down at the bottom, we can also add syslogging information of what's going on inside of HA. And I recommend doing that, especially during the initial configuration when you might be working out the kinks or when troubleshooting later on. Let's go ahead and click OK at this point. We see there's a job in progress. Let's wait for that to finish. Now the job is complete, and we can see that HA configuration is set to enabled. So let's scroll down in the Manage Configuration setting, the list of NSX Edge appliances. Now by default, of course, the list will only consist of a single object, the edge itself. It's from here, by the way, that we can actually come in and edit the initial placement properties that are associated with any VM. So data center, cluster, data store, the specific host it's on. We can reassign all that. We can change the resource reservations, all these things that we initially did during the configuration. But now we have two of these objects. And if we widen this out a little bit, we can see, oh look, we have perimeter gateway 01-0 and perimeter gateway 01-1. And one's listed as active and one is listed as standby. So this is all about the HA configuration. We can also see this if we head up to the home button and go down to VMs and templates. And on the left-hand side, we see we have perimeter gateway 01-0 and 01-1 because they're just VMs. Let's click on this new perimeter gateway 01-1. If you need to, you can press spacebar to wake it up, and then we'll log in as admin with the password of VMware1 exclamation point VMware1 exclamation point. And once we're logged into an edge, we can actually view what's going on as far as high availability goes by typing in show service high availability. It tells us, and we can see from here, that the status of the current device is set to standby. The polling frequency is every 3.75 seconds with a dead time after 15 seconds. Also, we can see the IP addresses that were self-assigned by this device, 169.254.1.2 connecting to 169.254.1.1, since we didn't give it a specific /30 IP range. In the config engine status, we can see that HA is enabled and that the HA admin state is up. If you're familiar with the idea of shutdown and no shutdown on an interface in a router, This is very similar. It's an administrative state of high availability, which is useful because if we'd like to validate failover, we can do that by changing the administrative state of HA without actually having to shut down the entire VM. Let's go back to the vSphere Web Client tab. Let's click the Home button, head back to Networking and Security. Let's go back to NSX Edges and double-click the NSX Edge. Then down in the list of NSX Edge appliances, make sure that the active perimeter gateway is selected and then click the Actions button in the menu. We're going to set the admin state to down. It says, are you sure you want to set it to down? We say yes. So this is a way to force failover. It's a communicative failover, so we don't have to wait 15 seconds because the active gateway will immediately tell the standby gateway, heads up, I'm jumping out of the game, you better function as the gateway router. If we head up to the perimeter gateway, that's spacebar to get out of that list, up arrow to run show service high availability again, press enter, and we can see the status of this device has changed to active. This is the active functioning router. And under the health check status, we can now see that 169.254 1.1 is administratively down. Let's head back to the web client. Let's select that active node, go to Actions, and set the admin state to up, and say yes, we want to bring it back up. When we do that, it comes back online, and refresh this page. We can see that now 01-1 is listed as the active node in here as well. Now, one other thing I did want to mention is that if we look down at the bottom, you'll notice that both HA nodes are residing on ESX04. And we said that NSX Edge ensures that the two VMs are not on the same host by default. Let's take a look at our configuration on this particular resource pool and cluster. We'll head back to Hosts and Clusters from the Home menu. Then on the left-hand side, let's expand region A01 Management 01. And we can see we've got 04 and 05, and 05 has a warning on it. Let's select that. 05, make sure we're looking on the Summary tab. And we can see that there's an issue with host memory usage. In other words, this host is actually didn't have the memory to support placing the perimeter gateway on that device. Otherwise, it would have spread the workload between 4 and 5. Well, my friend, by going through this nugget together, you've seen how we configure high availability for our virtual machines that are NSX Edge devices. In our case, we looked at the example of an existing NSX Edge, and in fact, all of those configuration options that we looked at are available during the initial configuration of an Edge device. So if you know ahead of time, I'm going to want high availability, go ahead and bake it right into that initial config. And I hope this felt really good for you to deploy, because I know I like having that safety valve, that extra feeling of protection that high availability can give. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.